What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. Bucks Kings, very weird basketball game. Keegan Murray leaves early with an injury. Doesn't come out for the second half. The Bucks run a ton of zone. They, on the season, typically run fewer than 4 possessions of zone defense per game. Now, they've dabbled in it here or there as they've been trying to figure out a way to play defense with this group, but it's never been anything that they've leaned super heavily into. And last night, after they gave up 37 points in the first quarter, they ran zone 33 times in the second, third, fourth quarter, and in overtime. It basically was their base defense at that point forward. They were in man and transition situations or after missed shots, but basically any dead ball or made basket, the Bucks were dropping into the zone. And it was a really bizarre game. The Kings basically had the game won in overtime. Malik Monk randomly missed 2 free throws. He's an 85% free throw shooter. He missed 2 free throws down the stretch. And then De'Aaron Fox, who's a 73% free throw shooter, he misses one as well. Next thing you know, Brook Lopez hits a corner 3 in transition, and Damian Lillard bombs a 3 at the buzzer, and all of a sudden the Bucks won. But that's typical regular season weirdness. That's the kind of thing that can happen, right? But there was a lot of interesting basketball in there from both teams that I want to dive into. So let's start with Milwaukee's zone. Now, I'm not sure if they're calling it, and I haven't done the appropriate digging in terms of like searching through to see if any Bucks beat reporter has asked one of the coaching staff about it or not. But judging from the tape, it looks like either a 2-1-2 or a 2-3 where the big man, the center who's typically underneath the basket is playing much higher up at like the foul line to show on any sort of guy coming off of a screen at the top of the key to try to contest or to prevent the high post touch, which is usually a dangerous part in a 2-3 zone, right? But I'm not really concerned with necessarily what it's called. Just schematically, that's what it looks like. 2 guys at the top, 2 guys in the corners, and then that center, instead of being directly under the rim, was playing up around the foul line. But it was an incredibly sloppy zone. The Bucks players didn't really seem to know who to guard or how to rotate when any sort of player movement happened. One of the specific themes that kept happening, and I clipped like a half dozen examples of this, but when the Kings would just cut a guy through to the opposite side of the floor. So let's say Kevin Huerter's on the right wing and the ball's on the left wing, and he'll just cut through. And like the guy for the Bucks in that, right side corner is kind of pointing like someone else has got to go get him. And no one would get him, and because Brook would be up at the foul line, they would just drop the ball underneath the basket for Huerter for a layup. Or one of the guys would run with that guy, but no one would kind of rotate around, and then they'd give up a wide open shot on the wing or in the corner. It was kind of sloppy in that sense. Basically, anytime the Kings cut a man through the zone, they scored. Anytime the Kings went with like an odd front, or there was a play where Malik Monk had the ball on the right wing, and De'Aaron Fox is on the left wing, and Malik Beasley's just face guarding him, and Dame's on the ball, and Kevin Huerter just kind of settles right at the top of the key in between those 2 guys. And because Malik's off ball face guarding De'Aaron Fox, and because Dame is on the ball, there's just nobody there. And Brook, even at the foul line, isn't in a position to contest or just toss it over to Kevin Huerter, and he makes a 3. That said, one of the reasons why the Bucks were able to stick in the zone as long as they did is the Kings did not do a really good job of attacking it by maintaining those specific things. Player movement, odd man fronts to try to take advantage of the 2-man front in the zone, right? For the most part, they just kind of set up in their 4-out kind of a dynamic where they have a shooter in each corner and shooter on the wing, ball handler on the opposite wing, and they just have Sabonis come screen the top man. And so they took a lot of like kind of contested floaters and mid-range jump shots, which just on a points per possession basis aren't super valuable. So even though the Bucks ran 35 possessions a zone and only gave up 34 points, in the numbers it seems fine, but when it came down to the end of the game situations when they needed to get stops, it was just really easy for De'Aaron Fox to just come off of that top ball screen. Brook is sitting back, shoot that little floater over the top or shoot that little short mid-range jump shot. So, and we're going to get to that when we talk big picture Bucks, because this is not a team I think that can get away with running massive amounts of zone. I just don't think it'll work against really, really good playoff offenses. But in this small sample size, it actually ended up being one of their more effective defenses up until the end of the game when they really needed to get stops. And so, what's interesting, I had what I was doing my film thread this morning. There was a Bucks fan, I believe a Bucks fan, who commented on Twitter, and they were asking like, "Hey, why do you think the Bucks went to this zone? Do you think it was just because they were sick and tired of chasing the Kings guards around, and they just wanted to not have to do that anymore?" And the reality is like, I think that was the idea. Like, I think the idea was, how do we make it so that Brook is always at the rim for every single one of these De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk, ball screens, basically. Or at least not necessarily at the rim, but waiting in help. So that at least if Dame or Malik gets beat soundly over the top of the screen, at least he's running into another body just by the configuration of the defense. All of the damage they were having at the rim, where they were getting wide open layups and back cuts and things like that, they were cuts. It was guys cutting behind Brook. But it was not a typical layup line of De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk getting downhill because of the configuration of the zone. That's why they did it. That said, it still has a very similar job in the sense that if you don't have Malik Beasley or Damian Lillard doing a good job chasing over the top, then those guys are getting really comfortable floaters and push shots, which are kind of typical drop coverage dynamics anyway, right? So like when push came to shove at the end of the game, it was Dame in particular that De'Aaron Fox kept going at and just getting wide open, easy shots in rhythm against Milwaukee, and Brook Lopez kind of sitting in that drop in the zone, right? And this is where I want to kind of draw a dynamic between the difference between like effort-related issues and personnel-related issues. Because it was interesting watching this game because there were dozens of opportunities for Damian Lillard and Malik Beasley to chase over the top of a screen in their zone to try to funnel guys into Brook Lopez. Now, one of the concepts we talk about a lot on the show is the idea of back pressure, right? So in that bracketing coverage, right, I'm chasing over the top of the screen, Brook is waiting. So we're the two ends of the coverage. But if there's only one end of the coverage, which is Brook offering some sort of contest, then the on-ball player, the ball handler, is not concerned about what's going on behind him. And so basically when he gets over the top of the screen, he can kind of get into his bag and he's comfortable. And now it's like I've talked about so many times on the show, now it's like a shooting drill. Now it's like when De'Aaron Fox is in the gym by himself over the summer and he's coming off of, one of his trainers as a fake ball screen and kind of settling into that easy shot that he likes to take there in the short range. When the backside bracket is included, now when he comes off of that screen, he's not comfortable because he's worried about what's happening behind him and worried about what's happening in front of him. It becomes a much more complicated dynamic. And, Malik Beasley has caught a lot of flack this year, and he has some limitations. But interestingly enough, like, Malik Beasley is actually a pretty good athlete. Like, he's got quickness. He's got, a little bit of vertical pop. He's got some of that stuff. He's a little undersized, right? Like that he's not a very big guard, but he's capable of doing a better job than what we've seen for the most part this season. And to Malik Beasley's credit, as he said in his post-game pressers, like, he's like, no, we're going to figure this out. We don't need a trade. Like, we just need to figure out how to play defense as a group. And he's putting his money where his mouth is from the standpoint of effort. He really is. He's trying. Like, most of Malik's issues are focus related. There were like 3 or 4 clips that I put in that thread today where it's like he's just not paying attention, or he's not seeing man in ball, or like there's the occasional possession he'll take off. But you can see him trying. And so I wanted to highlight 2 plays to kind of demonstrate to you guys the difference in effort versus just conceding that at the point of attack. And it's 2 De'Aaron Fox shots. And both of these plays are in that thread on my Twitter feed at _JasonLT. So guys, I want you guys to see that. So Malik Beasley on the ball. Sabonis is coming to set the screen. De'Aaron Fox has the ball. They're out further away from the basket, probably like 35 feet from the rim. And Malik Beasley's trying to deny him the use of the ball screen. So he's sitting up high on the ball screen, trying to force De'Aaron Fox to go back towards his right hand, right? So De'Aaron Fox does what every good guard does when they want to set their man up for a screen. So he takes a hard dribble towards his right and then does a behind the back dribble to then go use a screen. Basically getting Malik to abandon his deny position and try to get back in front of De'Aaron Fox so that he can beat him back over the top of the screen. which he does, right? But Malik, instead of giving up on the play, uses kind of like a nifty spin move to get underneath the screen and gets back in front of De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox, though, when he comes off the screen, he's screaming downhill with that left-hand drive. So he gets all the way down past the foul line. And when Beasley gets back into the play, De'Aaron Fox is almost surprised. And on the play, De'Aaron Fox takes his power dribble, and Malik Beasley takes the contact in his chest and goes flying. And like literally he's out of the play. And De'Aaron Fox ends up standing completely unguarded, 10 feet from the basket. And he's like, oh shit, I'm wide open. And he takes this like weird left-handed, he's a lefty, but he takes this weird little short jump shot that looks just kind of like a break rhythm jump shot, and he misses it. And what's interesting to me about that play is even though it was a wide open shot, it was a disrupted rhythm shot because Malik fought to get back into the play, put his body on the line, and throw off the entire rhythm of De'Aaron Fox's attack in the pick and roll. So that even when he got a good look, it wasn't a good look that he typically practices. And so it was just weird. Like he was in an NBA game I think it was in the fourth quarter too, and he's just rising up completely unguarded at 10 feet. It was just weird. Like and off of the different footwork and kind of handle than he expected, right? Now I want to fast forward, and we'll come back to that play in a second. Now I want to fast forward to the final minutes. Bucks are up by 5, I think, with like a minute and a half left or something. Same exact setup in the zone. Damian Lillard is the guy that's on ball this time. And De'Aaron Fox, which by the way was because of the way it was organized in their zone, whether or not Fox or Beasley was on ball was typically just based on which side of the floor the Kings decided to attack from, right? So on this play, De'Aaron Fox comes off the ball screen and Dame just concedes it. So like kind of sort of takes a lunge step to kind of get over the top of the screen. But once De'Aaron actually beats him over the top, he literally stops playing. And so because he stops playing, De'Aaron Fox, completely unconcerned with what's happening behind him, kind of goes into this like nifty rhythm pull-up 15-footer. Brook Lopez actually gets a better contest on it, a much better contest than on the wide open one that Malik Beasley made him take earlier, right? The difference is that little pull-up 15-foot jump shot that De'Aaron Fox took is the kind of shot he practices all summer. The same footwork, the same handle, and everything that he practices all summer because Dame did nothing to break his rhythm as he's fighting over the top of the screen. So I thought it was a really interesting kind of example of two different plays. Like one play where Beasley kind of gave up an open shot and one play where Dame gave up a contested shot, but because of back pressure, one shot was missed and the other shot was not. One play, Malik Beasley disrupts rhythm and forces a miss. The other play, Damian Lillard does nothing to disrupt rhythm and De'Aaron Fox makes a tough shot. Again, like we always focus on shot result and we look at all these different things, but more often than not, it's can a defense disrupt your rhythm? Because if they can disrupt your rhythm, that will lead to differences in shot results. Something that we talk about all the time on the show, and we're going to talk about again when we get to Clippers-Wolves later, because the Clippers didn't shoot particularly well. And a lot of Clippers fans, even the Clippers broadcast was like, the Clippers are just not shooting well. And it's like, are you watching what Minnesota is doing to disrupt rhythm? Actually, there was a specific clip that I pulled in the Clippers-Wolves thread that's another great example of back pressure, this time actually by Terrence Mann on Anthony Edwards. And one of the interesting things that Terrence Mann did, right as he was running over the top of the screen, he swipes around the back and clips some of the basketball. Doesn't actually get a steal, but make sure Ant knows he's there. Then as Ant is going downhill, Terrence Mann reaches out and just puts his left hand on Ant's hip. He's touching him. And I thought it was a really interesting example of like disrupting rhythm because all that's doing is it's freaking Ant out, in terms of his decision-making process in a really short period of time because he's like, oh shit, like Terrence Mann's right behind me, right? And on that play, Ant drives like headlong into Daniel Tyson, gets stripped and turns the ball over. And that's kind of a great example of what I'm talking about. Like the hand on the hip, that's not going to actually cause Ant to miss a shot if he decides to rise up and shoot. But what it does is it gets in the ball handler's head. It starts to disrupt their typical decision-making process. It's such an important part of any sort of a coverage that involves a big man waiting in ball screens to help at the rim. Now, one of the big reasons why I brought this particular example up and went into such detail is this is where I want to talk about the Bucks defense in the big picture, because they beat the Celtics the other night, right? And what was really interesting to me about that game was early on in the game, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown kind of co-opted the offense. And they were really, really hunting their own shot. And they were constantly settling for these tough mid-range jump shots over Chris Middleton and Giannis, who, by the way, just purely from a matchup standpoint, Tatum on Middleton or Brown on Giannis or vice versa is not actually as good of a matchup as Derek White or Drew Holiday against Damian Lillard and Malik Beasley. That's where those matchups are. And so what I thought was really interesting about that is, like, we've talked a lot about Boston's offensive approach, right? And whether or not they're like going to be able to out-execute a lot of these teams. And that was an interesting example to me in the Boston-Milwaukee matchup of, like, yeah, we talk a lot about Malik Beasley and Damian Lillard as perimeter defenders, but what if Boston's not deliberate enough to attack those guys? And what if they do have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum just constantly try to attack better defenders, and that leads to problems for them? But we're going to get to that a little bit more in a little bit when we talk about the Boston Celtics matchup, which I want to get to later on in the show. But specifically, though, to win 4 playoff series, you're probably going to have to go through a skill guard of some kind. Like, let's say you beat Boston and you end up in a series against Denver. Who's the guy that you're putting on Jamal Murray, right? So, like, this is a consistent issue that we're going to see. And what I find encouraging about it is Malik is trying. And Dame is capable of playing a hell of a lot better than he did. I thought, Dame saved the day. He made the bomb. He made the prayer. He won the game. But they should have lost. And if Sacramento makes their free throws, they lose. And Dame had a huge role to play in that down the stretch because he wasn't even trying. There were. I talked about the one at the end of regulation. There's another one in overtime that's like borderline embarrassing. And I clipped that play and I put it on my Twitter feed. Again, a 2-point game in overtime. And Dame is just like, nah, I'm not even going to get back in the play. Like, there's like almost no effort taking place there. And like, this is where it gets interesting because, like, I don't know that the Bucks have the assets necessarily to go bring back a really high level 2-way player to replace Malik Beasley. And Malik is shooting the shit out of the basketball this year and attacking closeouts well. Like, Malik really is. And so at a certain point, Malik Beasley just kind of getting better at this might be the best hope for Milwaukee in the long run. That said, it's going to require 2 things. They're going to have to get more effort from Dame. And maybe this is just handling eating regular season innings, so to speak. But when they get to the postseason, at least, Dame is going to have to at least try to do some of this stuff. Doesn't have to do a ton of it, but he's going to have to do a better job than he's been doing. And then secondly, on offense, they're going to have to reach that Denver-esque level of inevitability. Because I don't think this team is fast enough on the perimeter defensively to be a dominant defense, right? This is where I want to get to the Bucks offense down the stretch. So once again, they closed with a lot of Dame Giannis pick and roll, and Sacramento was blitzing them for the most part. And at first Dame was having some trouble with the blitz because they were doing a really aggressive job blitzing him and preventing the easy pass. But then Dame countered that by using a nice mix of like swing passes along the perimeter to make the roll man pass, or at one point he used like a really nifty reverse pivot to kind of get out of that mess. But like basically with the blitz, they were generating these short roll opportunities for Giannis. And then from there were 2 things that stood out to me. One, a little bit of indecisiveness from Giannis. Like, there was a play where Pat Connaughton's wide open in the corner and he like didn't want to throw it to him. And then like he hesitated and then he did finally throw it to him, but he threw it way too high. And so the advantage was gone. And then like a couple possessions later, he does actually throw the ball to Pat Connaughton in the corner, but he misses the 3. And it's like, he'd be in rhythm if you just keep feeding him there. Like, trust me, if your offense keeps generating wide open corner 3s for Pat Connaughton, like, you're going to score a lot of points. Like that's a shot he's going to hit at well over a point per possession, right? There a little bit was like the layout of the floor. Like I've talked about this before. I really, really like the cleared side pick and rolls for Dame and Giannis. So like, when you clear the side, let's say Dame has the ball on the left wing and Giannis comes and sets a screen and he kind of short rolls off to the left, elbow extended or left wing, kind of short range, like 20 feet from the basket on the left side of the floor. Then with the Kings, all their help defenders are on the other side of the floor or in the paint. And even if they're in the paint, Giannis would have a head of steam going downhill towards them. And so Dame can bring the two defenders over and just kind of hook a looping pass over the top, and Giannis can just kind of catch and rip to his left. But they're running it in the middle of the floor. And one of the things that sucks about operating in the middle of the floor is it's just really hard to see both sides of the floor. There was a play that I clipped and added to that thread where Giannis short rolls. It's a Dame Giannis pick and roll in the middle of the floor. Blitz comes, easy pocket pass. But on the play, when Giannis catches it, Malik Monk is ignoring Malik Beasley in the left corner and comes over to kind of like help and like build a wall on Giannis. And Malik Beasley's standing wide open in the corner. A guy who's shooting damn near 50% from three this year, right? And well over 50% in the last few games, right? And Giannis just doesn't see it because it's behind him. And he ends up dribbling into the lane and taking one of those, kind of hook shots at like a push floater in the lane from like 12 feet out that he ends up missing. And that's an example of what I'm talking about. Like, it's true that if you run it on the cleared side, the rotations are a little easier for the defense on the weak side. But that doesn't matter if Giannis can't actually make the pass to that guy, right? And so what I like about clearing the side is it simplifies the decision-making process, and any sort of negative impact of making the defensive rotations easier because the shooters are more closely packed on the weak side is undone by the fact that it's just easier to see. It's just easier to see for Giannis in those situations. And I clipped a bunch of examples of the Dame Giannis pick and roll, and like there were a bunch of examples of them just not really being as kind of locked in terms of making the reads as they could be. I talked about the Giannis missing Connaughton in the corner. I talked about Giannis missing Malik Beasley in the corner. There was a play where Dame just decided to snake the pick and roll, which means he tried to get back over to the other side after he went over the screen as Giannis was rolling, and they like ran into each other. There was a play where they did run a cleared side pick and roll for Giannis, and Giannis was open on the left wing. And instead of Dame making the pass, he dribbled into traffic and forced a floater over four bodies and missed it, right? Point being, like, they can get so much better at this stuff. And so kind of to bring it all back into the big picture here, what's encouraging to me about the Bucks is three things. One, Malik Beasley's trying, and he can get way better at defense. So can Dame. Dame is not trying yet, but he's capable. And as a unit, I don't think they're going to be able to run zone, but I do think that they're capable of at least getting to a higher level of defense than where they are currently. Two, their offense can still get so much better. Sacramento flat out executed Milwaukee down the stretch in this game. In overtime, 0-0 basically, the Kings outplayed them until they choked at the foul line. And a big part of that was the Dame Giannis pick and roll not quite generating the consistent offense that it needed to generate. They can get better there. That's encouraging. And then three, what we learned in that Celtics game, which is like Boston definitely has the personnel to expose all of Milwaukee's flaws and to beat them in a 7-gamer. I think they do. I think they have the personnel to do that at every team in the league. I think they're the most talented roster, right? Problem is, will they be diligent enough to do so? And I thought that the Milwaukee-Boston game where Milwaukee jumped them early, heavy dose of pull-up, tough jump shots from Tatum and Brown early, not a lot of stuff through Derek White and Drew Holiday early to just try to get the defense in rotation against Milwaukee's guards. And it was a big part of how Milwaukee ran away with that game. Obviously, schedule played a role. Celtics fans, I'm fully aware, it was a really tough schedule back to back. I'm just talking schematically in that game. Boston didn't have a super smart approach. And I think that's a great indicator of like, if I was trying to make the case for how Boston and Milwaukee could go Milwaukee's way, it would be Milwaukee reaches their individual defensive ceiling. The Dame Giannis pick and roll is unguardable and consistently generates high quality shots. And Boston just has bad process. That would be how it would break down. And so, again, an encouraging week of basketball for the Milwaukee Bucks from the standpoint of like they went undefeated. You beat the Celtics. You manhandled the Celtics. Encouraging stuff. Obviously, getting a Damian Lillard game-winning three is a big deal for just, kind of legitimizing the trade and showing why you trade for Damian Lillard. But there's just so much room for improvement. I choose to go positive there. There's so much more room for improvement for this particular team. All right, the Kings. They had this game won. Again, in regulation, they came back by getting stops in the half court against the Dame Giannis pick and roll and by De'Aaron Fox getting buckets on the other end. I talked about the ones against Dame and his little drop coverage. Game tying shot was kind of a transition possession. And it was really interesting. Good defense from Milwaukee because you're down 2 or you're up 2, so you just don't want to lose. Like it's overtime or win the game, basically, right? And Giannis ended up picking up De'Aaron Fox in transition, and he had to press up on De'Aaron Fox because De'Aaron Fox is shooting the shit out of pull-up threes this year, so you got to take that away. And then all the help defenders were glued up off the ball, as they should be, because you don't want to give up a three that could beat you, right? But I just wanted to shout out De'Aaron Fox because he ended up getting an angle on Giannis and finishing above him at the rim, and there's just not many players in the league who can do that against an athlete like Giannis. And then in overtime, they out-executed Milwaukee and just choked the game away at the foul line, to put it simply. That's just what happened. I mean, De'Aaron Fox, 73% shooter, goes 1 for 2. Malik Monk, 85% shooter, goes 0 for 2. So, obviously that's tough. That's a tough way to lose a game. And they're 6-6 in their last 12, 15th in offense, 16th in defense over that span. De'Aaron Fox has cooled off quite a bit. De'Aaron Fox's first 21 games, 30 points, 4 rebounds, and 6 assists on 48% from the field and 40% from 3. In this 6-6 stretch over the last 12, 25 points per game, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists per game on 44% from the field and 37% from 3. So De'Aaron Fox has cooled off, but Domantas Sabonis is playing at the highest level of his career, in my opinion. 23 points, 14 rebounds, and 9 assists over the last 12 games. 66% from the field and 56% from 3. And again, kind of looking just big picture with the Kings, I trust De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk to be able to generate quality shots in the playoffs. I do. They just need to bracket their defense properly. Again, when you don't have really high level rim protection, you need to be excellent at the point of attack and excellent in weak side help and rebounding. And that's where that athletic forward archetype comes in. And this is why I was happy with them at least talking about Siakam, because it reveals to me that the Kings front office at least has their mind in the front place. Like, to me, that archetype of player, that big athletic forward that can clean up as a low man in rim protection and defensive rebounding, is like a prerequisite for this team to have any sort of real championship potential. And so, in my opinion, like if you get De'Aaron Fox at the level he was playing to start the year, and you get a Pascal Siakam on that front line, like they're not in the Denver tier, but they enter into that tier of teams that could win the conference if things go right. And so I'll be really curious to see what they end up doing here at the deadline.